Hello and welcome to the Ohio Arts Council's Rife Gallery. I'm Kat Sheridan, director of this space, and today I am thrilled we're going to go through the 2023 Biennial Juried exhibition. And here to help us with that journey are our esteemed jurors, and I'm going to let them introduce themselves.
Hi, I'm Dr. Melissa Crum, an arts educator and an equity and inclusion practitioner.
I'm Jolene Powell, an artist. Also, I'm a professor, director of a gallery, and a diversity, equity, and inclusion coordinator at Marietta College.
Hello, I'm Yusuf Lateef from Toledo, Ohio, an artist and educator.
All right, so some folks may be curious about what a juried exhibition is. So it's a little bit different than a curated exhibition. So curators will have an idea for an exhibition and select artists to support that idea. Whereas a juried exhibition, we have a call for submissions. And for this particular show, we had 1,661 individual art pieces submitted that then they had to call down to the 64 that we have in the exhibition, which is a smidgen under 4%, I believe. So can you all talk a little bit about your experience with that? Like how did you approach jurying this massive amount of works?
So first, it was amazing really seeing all the creativity, all the artists across the state. And so, of course, the word that comes to mind is overwhelming, but in a really phenomenal way. What really called me to different pieces was really thinking about what kind of story is the artist trying to tell? What is the artist trying to help me think about regarding Ohio specifically? And really helping to see how does that work pull me in? And so that's how I really started to think about how am I considering the works for the show.
For me, I was initially drawn to the physical aspects of the piece, the color, the formal elements and things like that are what initially engaged me. And then I would sort of explore the intention or the concept behind it. And then ideally for me, selecting a work to be in the exhibition was a equal balance of formal elements as well as concept and intention.
And the same, I would look for a story or some type of narrative, and also really try to void out and listen to the work and see where it would take me naturally, and then deduce down from there.
Yeah, so it's a really big process. They go through and have 2 weeks to pull it down to, scoring at a specific level, and then they come together as a group to then further narrow it down. So it's a really pretty phenomenal process to get to watch. And to be honest, from that 1,661 pieces, we probably had another 5 excellent shows that could have been put on from that work. It is a tough job, and I think you all did a wonderful job. So something that is really important with juried shows and shows writ large is ordering the work in a way that allows a viewer to have a seamless experience through that. And so in order to try and honor the good work that you all did, I worked really hard to lay out this exhibition in a way that has really great object association. Maybe there's kind of some rhythm of color and pattern. So you're gonna see some of those things happening, and that we're gonna kind of frame some of our conversations around that, pick out a couple of pieces to talk about, and then go from there. Sound good?
Sounds good.
Sounds great.
All right, so over here we have, you'll see there's some color associations happening here. So we start out with Molly Fitzpatrick, who has this piece, this woven piece called Traveler, and then it goes into Julie Martin's. You can see an obvious kind of color story that's happening there. But Jolene, you were chatting about Molly's work earlier today, and I wanted you to talk a little bit about those formal aspects that drew you particularly to this piece.
Yes, with Molly's piece, I was initially taken by the color story, the analogous colors of the green and the blue, and then this sort of rhythmic or pattern stitching that happens in the fiber piece, and then the very thin red, the complementary color of red. And so for me, what that set up was this optical illusion, this reverberation, and if you look at it long enough, you'll have sort of an after image kind of feel. And what I loved about it was it's not asking a lot of the viewer as far as riddling out some kind of story. It's what it's requesting of us is to sort of tap into our human rhythms and our human breath and our human heartbeat. That's what the rhythm pattern does for me. And I thought it was a great piece to be included in the exhibition.
Excellent. Anything else to add, folks?
No,
All right. So as we go through here and we see Julie Martin's piece, there's also something, that rhythm happens again, the way that she's cutting up that image vertically and piecing it back together for us to enjoy. So going from Molly Fitzpatrick's piece over to Julie Martin's, not only is there a color story, but there's that rhythmic kind of chopping that happens that's really lovely. And then we come over to Tina Tomorrow's piece. Sorry, Tina, if I said your last name incorrectly. Tina's work, The Prodigal Son, and it pulls in that color story, but then goes into these kind of brighter tones that allow us to very easily transition into all the way to the corner with Duarte Brown's work. So, yeah.
Yeah, there's something very interesting in which they're not, these pieces, Tina and Duarte's work isn't necessarily talking directly to each other, but in some kind of way they're in conversation when we think about generations, when we're thinking about kind of passing on. And so we see this prodigal son kind of coming back and what appears to be kind of other generations present and embracing. And that same thing seems to be similarly happening here in Duarte's work, where you have these masks that can represent like the history and ancestors, but we have an elder clearly almost like knighting or passing on or affirming this young person. And so there's something very interesting around community and generations that's really kind of beautifully articulated here, as well as the brightness and the colors draw our attention to many of these areas in the canvas as well.
And really nicely too, there's these similar kind of mark makings, very different actual execution of it, but these kind of wiggly paint marks to these really almost Van Gogh-esque kind of marks that Casey has here. And just these nice rhythms and beautiful transitions that you have all the way through Carrie's work as well. And of course you have to have transitions. So Duarte has these great pops of red and really vibrant chromatic colors. And that allows us to kind of come around the corner to Elham's work in the corner here. This is ballpoint pen. And there's something really lovely about that. Now there were a couple of pieces by Elham that you all enjoyed, but this is the piece that came to fruition for this exhibition. Does anybody want to chat a little more about Elham's work?
Mm-hmm. Well, the lovely thing about Elham's work that first drew me in was obviously the flower pattern and where that comes from as being an Iranian American now living in the United States. And so she was speaking about the sort of misogynistic culture and oppression that happened when she grew up in. And so she's talking about this sort of feminine spirit and endurance and that sort of experience of when she grew up and that particular culture and then now living in the Western world. And so the flowers represent hope and a lot of things feminine.
And nicely, like when you think about Andrew, if you'll come up a little bit closer, and you can just see the hatching in there. Now, ballpoint pen is something we're all really familiar with. We've all touched a ballpoint pen. There is a absolute kind of affinity that each of us are going to have with that, because you know that, you've touched it, you've had that experience, and yet probably not created something like this. So there's a real respect. There's some time there that you can recognize in those multiple hatches. It's just lovely.
I remember even starting to use ballpoint pen outside of pencil and knowing that you have another relationship with mistakes,
That's right.
right? You can't erase it. You gotta keep moving.
It's always additive.
It's always additive, and they're not mistakes. They're always these opportunities to build from, right? So once you go in and you start going in a certain frame, it really helps lead you. And I'm pretty sure the artist was able to find new opportunities as they're working because you can't go back.
Yeah, it reminds me of the artist Giacometti. So he used a lot of ballpoint pen and a lot of like mark making, and he said that he would mark until he found the right mark.
Interesting.
But he would have that history there. And so there's some, really lovely kind of tie-ins that we can think about there.
And this idea of not being able to go back, right?
That's right.
Not being able to move in both directions, right? You can only go in this forward motion,
I love that. And then just behind us, we have these really lovely portraits of, what I love about Evan's work is that he's imagining a gathering of folks that, perhaps they're gathered like this. But I love that he's imagining this and like it includes you in that party. And how many of us have deeply enjoyed these artists' works and like imagined ourselves in spaces with them and just appreciating what they've given to us artistically. And then we come over here to Marcus's and this just gorgeously created oil painting. Just the lighting there, it's hyper realistic. That's, technically incredibly hard to do. And it's another time spent honoring, right? So many marks, how much time was spent concentrating on that visage, right? So there's some real honoring happening on this wall that I think is beautiful.
And this is honoring, because you gotta have those edges
Laid.
correct, okay? So when you're using, you're not only thinking about the material, but you're also thinking about the culture and the subject that you're painting, right?
Yeah.
And what type of material will actually lend itself to how you're trying to represent. And I think that was like a very beautiful way of like moving in on some of these, crucial areas like hands and the shadows and the fades that you're getting. And you really are getting into the gaze of the eyes and each eyelash. It's a beautiful composition.
Yeah. And then that pulls us around the corner. And what you'll see when you're in the space, there's a really great echoing of shape from Anna England's work to Tina Tomorrow's work. Like the upper held arms and then this up here is really lovely. And we'll talk about how Anna and Melinda and maybe David's work are in conversation. Do you all want to chat about one of these, a few of these, all of these? So I'm saying a lot of words. I'm going to let the jurors, because they selected these pieces, talk a little bit.
Well, we didn't have a hand in hanging the show, and it was really interesting to see, how the work was treated in that way, right?
Sure.
So you have Dan Hernandez, it's just like anchoring this side, and then you have Anna England here, and this shield. These are all like these shield shapes. We're thinking about combat or this this is what resonates for me, right? So this is England is talking about protection, and from a glance, this is material that you would that almost looks like iron or mail that you would see, but these are very delicate materials that they're using. Marble is a delicate type of stone, but it's not protection in regards to your physical, but it's a spiritual protection that we're thinking about, because in reality there's no way to protect something that's depreciating over time. It's going to like these shells are very brittle. A snail is a snail uses this, yes, protection, but it's very brittle as well, right? You can step on it. But I think it's, Anna's talking about another type of protection. Mm-hmm. And we have that same shape or form and sense in Melinda Rosenberg's work here, in this idea of a shield, right? This idea of protecting a thing. And then you come to Dan Hernandez's work, and where he's also creating these dualities of the past and the present, where he's thinking about gaming, Donkey Kong, but also he's thinking about manuscript painting as well. And the people that were creating manuscript paintings would have never thought that their work would be in conversation with a video game, But here the artist gets the opportunity to place these things next to one another to create a whole nother story.
Thank you, Yusuf. All right, folks, we're on to this wall. Anybody want to chat?
Yeah, I think there's something really interesting, almost like behind the eyes of this character that Lisa McClamrett created. And there's this like halo, which reminds me or makes me think of, am I thinking like Byzantine? Mm-hmm. What is like Byzantine? Like this idea of something angelic, something spiritual here. And the title being "You Grow Where You're Planted" is thinking about. What it makes me think is this person is trying to potentially figure out how to not just survive, but thrive, right? What does it look like in having either this spiritual grounding or something else that's bigger than this character supporting them? It makes me think of that quote, that the phrase, they buried us, but they didn't know we were seeds, right? So what does it look like to kind of persevere in particular kinds of ways, but in a quiet kind of way? But then next to this image, what makes me feel like is this horizon, almost like out of whatever this kind of chaos is, there's something rising or something, some clarity that's coming past this horizon. Almost that same light and horizon is almost behind this figure in a way. So thinking about the importance of light symbolically and what it might mean in our lives.
Yeah, I remember you all were pretty taken with the story of this work by Edward. It's really about the loss of his wife, mm-hmm. and that horizon being the beautiful time when she was there with him, and this being the chaos of grief and trying to come back to that. So I love that kind of connection that you've made there. That's fantastic. All right, let's come around on this side. So we have some really excellent photography over here, complemented by this, I think it's a graphite or charcoal mm-hmm. painting mm-hmm. with this flora, and then this extraordinarily executed drawing of a person to photography. So this is the black and white wall, right, clearly. And it's important, you have these kind of spottings of things that connect each other. Even to how the figure within the space is pointed. Like really important that you have them facing in or out, depending on how you're trying to lead a viewer through a space. So folks, would you like to pick out a couple on this wall and chat? Yes, go for it, please.
Yeah, for me, I was interested in this piece. Well, the whole wall is beautiful. It is very well composed, like with the models in the end looking in, and then this piece here in the middle is almost like literally a string uniting all of the wall together and holding it. But this piece in particular, the artist is called Hush. And so, and the artist has a long tradition with photography, black and white photography, and this is representing the sort of female voice that is often silenced or not heard or not allowed to be spoken. And so that's what drew me to this one. And then I believe Edmund is a self-taught photographer?
Yes.
Yes, okay. So, And this is just masterful, right? And the command of the model is just beautiful. So we have this sort of range of femininity, right? Where you're, thinking about your words and if your words are going to be heard, and then this lovely, strong, dynamic female form, both in black and white. And then, like I said, this is a unifying piece between them, simply for the monochromatic palette, and then also the liquid charcoal, which acts like paint. And so there's some paint and liquid charcoal. And so that movement and that tactileness that we sense in the Hush piece, and then again with the liquid collodion wet photography. So this wall is just remarkable and replete with sensuality and tactileness. Things like the fur here in this coat. And again, very strong, powerful, engaging portraits here that welcome the viewer into the gallery.
There's something I found a couple of things I think, a combination of the treatment of light and also interesting approaches to technique. So thinking about Jane Pryor's piece and this creative way of thinking about photography, but then also the use of this is pencil. Mm-hmm. Yes, pencil to almost mimic an old style of photography, so that there's an intentional kind of out of focus areas that would happen in this kind of older approach to photography, but yet the face is very much sharply in focus, and being intentional about some of those very interesting things. And this kind of painstaking process of this photography work, there's something really about this combination of light and technique that I found very fascinating with these different artists.
And then let's pop over here. Now, this is a sculpture that requires you to see both sides. So please have a look at that side and then come around on this side. Speaking of art telling a story, this is very much a story. This artist is taking you through their experience with diabetes. And so how many people know and love folks that have that and have to contend with the lifestyle changes required to maintain health? And it's also just masterfully done. Like, you think about, my journals don't look like this. I wish they did. It's beautiful, but it also so beautifully ties the rest of the room together. These highlights of red kind of pop off in all these other ones. Anybody else have anything to add about Adam's work?
Just the fingerprint component, and that being one of the main components when it comes to living with, diabetes, right? Like, maybe it's different now.
Pricking the finger, right, yes, for sure.
And in the relationship with blood and things that, a lot of times, other folks don't have to necessarily consider.
Sure.
But I have friends with diabetes, and they have an acute sense of their mortality, mm-hmm. and the things that they need to keep them moving. Yeah. Right. So it's really interesting to see this, personal, very personal piece being, considered in a sculptural way.
Right.
Right. And books are usually things that are closed up and you don't see it right now. But to be able to see a journal like this opened up, really kind of speaks to the overall story, I think.
Yeah. I also love that it speaks to a daily practice. So of course you have a daily practice of pricking that finger to make sure that your sugar is right. But many people that have journals have a daily practice of writing in them. So, and then, like, I have the most respect for artists that are able to maintain a daily practice. That is incredibly hard to do. And those that do it and do it as a part of their art is also just phenomenal. So I think this kind of nicely feeds us into Mark's work. Does anyone want to talk about the piece, Angela? I think you were surprised when you saw the size of it, Melissa. Isn't that right?
I was. I found it very striking. And there's something very warm about the face of the subject that really draws me in. And I want to know more about this particular figure. But there's, it's interesting because it's not quite photorealistic, but there's something also that that gives me that feeling. But I love how the figure is outlined in red, and this use of kind of pastel was done really well.
I want to know about Angela too, right? And when I look at the choice of this background color, it reminds me of, and you know, I have people in my family that, you know, have this same kind of spirit as Angela, and what she's giving off and what they're drawing, this pastel is giving us. You can't lie to Angela. She will see right through you, and that she's everyone's aunt. You know, she will tell you her most honest opinion. You may not, and you may not like it, right? But it's an unfiltered type of thing, an experience that happens, and it's the harshest, warmest, inviting light that you can ever experience, you know? And that's kind of, and it keeps reflecting itself in her eyes, in the necklace, you know.
The Mona Lisa smile, just like a hint of it.
Right, right. Like she just said, now you know. Quote unquote.
Wonderful. All right, let's pull around to Summer Zickafoos's work. So this is a unique piece in that it's a mashup of materials, right? Jolene, you want to chat a little bit about it?
Sure. Yeah, what first drew me to this piece is the sort of warm wood tones, right? Like that's the first sort of inviting thing. And then after a little digging, you realize that the photograph or the image comes from a Facebook post. And in the digital world, that's where we have a lot of friends, right? Really, we have digital friends, then we have real friends. And so what this piece does is bridge that gap between the digital world and our actual friends. So this is from, you know, the cup is cast from, you know, an actual coffee session with a friend in the physical world. And so we have that moment of connecting the digital friends and the real life friends. Also, what else is going on in the piece? I was really intrigued by it as far as, you know, sort of the intimacy of just chopping something as a daily routine, the shoes, and then the chairs outside, right? So the chairs are here, they're set up in a way for conversations like you would have with friends, and around this table, and then outside, looking out into the landscape. And again, just the use of warm tones and then a little bit of green, whether it was staged or not. But we have bits of the green landscape. We have the green apron hanging on the refrigerator, and then we have some of the, you know, what looks like jadeite or something on the shelves. So it's just the use of color, the use of materiality, the sentimentality, and the idea of friendship is what drew me to this piece.
All right, and then we come through and we have, there's clearly a color story on this wall. There's these nice kind of hearkenings to fauna in each of the pieces. Folks, do you have any particular ones that you want to chat about? We have Tina's work here honoring Latinx women in just a really beautiful way. Jeannie Coy, like this wonderful collaging that's happening. Bernard, you guys talked about Bernard's work quite a bit and how he's forcing you into multiple spaces at once. And then Linda McClanahan's The Story of the Swan Maiden. Come on, pulling you in, come on. Which one are you gonna talk about?
Go.
Well, you know, I'm curious about how the choices you guys make when you're hanging the work, right? And how each wall does have its own story. And these colors all hearken to the earth.
Sure.
And you have to talk about the indigenous spirit, or this idea of what springs from, history in an original way. This gives us this opportunity to kind of time travel, right? You're looking at things from different vantages, and then it also invites you even closer and see the very the smallest of brush details. And then here's this technical carving treatment that you get from this piece here. That's it's fabric on wood collage. It's giving you a lot of different materials, a lot of different avenues to think about, but also a very intuitive process of layering, and also this play between positive and negative. And then it's bookended by these two feminine portraits, and you have to honor, when you think about the earth, when you think about authenticity or originality or the indigenous spirit, you have to consider femininity in a feminine form, and motherhood, and all of those aspects. That's what I'm getting from this wall.
That's great. That's great. All right, let's pull around, and we have Christopher Hartway. Unique sculpture in that it's lit, so there's some aspects of that are surprising, right? Like, you all were very taken by the sculptures that he submitted, and had to winnow it down to this piece. Why'd you choose it? Why this one?
Oftentimes we think about the soul as light, right? And at least I do, something that we carry, a light inside of us. And, sculpture a lot of times has a certain weight to it. Where this kind of plays on, it's weighted, but also has this light in regards to weight as well, right? And then it's graphic in nature, and it can imply, and it builds from all different, a lot of different types of backgrounds.
Wonderful. Yeah, there's like a sci-fi aspect to this too that I really appreciate.
I'm getting some Octavia Butler.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. All right, so here we come on to our splash wall. We have a couple of pieces. We'll chat briefly about David and Mark and Craig's work. Clearly another color story is happening here. So David Deniston, this piece is Welcome to Ice Cream Land, really vibrant, warm, purple, red hues, an enormous piece. This is an enormous piece. It is larger than life, literally, as you can see. It's much bigger than me. So you'll enjoy it as you come into the gallery. And then we come over here to Mark Ross, and something that I really appreciate about Mark's work is that he tells the story of his action by letting you see the drips on the side. This is work, like a few works in this exhibition, that reward you with a slow look. Like, if you take your time and investigate this piece, more things reveal themselves to you. So when you look at the side and you see, oh my goodness, how many layers went into this, how much time and love were spent on this piece. And then we come over to Craig Fisher, who is speaking about a profound volcanic eruption, Cotopaxi. I'm sure I didn't say that right. But he's using these printing processes that are so intense, and when done well, are just gorgeous. So mezzotint, not easy to do. This artist is getting in there. You have to do a bunch of marks onto a copper plate to get this deep, rich, velvety black. And then you carve back out and soften that. And to imagine someone doing that with something this large, it's astounding. And then having all of this geometry and a chincolé, which is another, added process. So not only are you doing this mezzotint on an enormous piece of copper that is incredibly, incredibly labor intensive, then you're gonna risk it all with a chincolé. Kind of talks about that volcanic eruption too. There's this element of chance that we all live on every day, right? And a beautiful color story to match. So then we naturally come this way around to Kent's work, and you have this repeating circular thing. So there's that object association. This one is Polaris, so he's speaking about that North Star, and there's, deep meaning around folks understanding constellations. How are we guided, whether it's across the seas or on land, and the abstraction of it is also really, like, it almost feels like a galaxy in here. But that central kind of pulsating, it's just lovely. I think you guys did a great job choosing these works. Anyone want to chat? I'm talking so much. Say words, folks.
There's something very interesting. So I just love the work and the way the colors are engaging with each other, but it also is not in direct conversation with the sculpture, but there is something about out of this worldness, as well as with this image, and thinking about something around fantasy and something around outside of our kind of context, right? So maybe it's space, maybe it's fantasy, maybe it's something, but it's almost like the abstract kind of a world in which some of these pieces could potentially live in.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I used to sew granite, and to see it in the large slab form and see what happens in nature and all the different layers, and you would see things like this. You would see things happen in ways that you couldn't even have imagined, And to see an artist, do their own take on something that actually happens in the earth, it's a really interesting conversation, and how it kind of creates another type of cycle.
Mm-hmm. And that pulls us really nicely into the artist Zach Van Horn. So geometry happening in both of these, very different geometry, but also abstraction of existing things, whether it's the galaxy or star constellation or a home and portraits. And there's also a tactility to this. If you see up in the corner, it's where the surface of this piece breaks away a little bit. So there's a surface texture that isn't immediately apparent. Certainly not on a 3x3 digital image, right? But you get rewarded by looking a little closer to that work.
I became really fascinated with the process and wanting to find out exactly how did they go about this kind of picture in a picture kind of transposed on this image, and what does that mean? What does this artist want us to better understand about this empty house, better understand about the context in which it was situated in, and why is there this kind of disruption around it?
Yeah.
And I remember even, I recall always you would go into like empty houses, and you would feel the energy that was in there, like the families that were sitting at the table that are no longer there, the summers that they were, experiencing there, and how this is probably 4 different paintings all in one square format, right? And you can keep pulling away at different layers, right? So like this has all of these opportunities to think about how we actually see, and we have to consider how we're engaging with space and our own feelings, and what energy could possibly look like, right? Can we think about that, And I think those are questions that artists are able to play with.
Let's pop around here and have a look at this pedestal here. We have multiple works. Let's talk about why you chose these. Jolene, you've been quiet for a little bit. Jump in.
So the Davis piece here, for me, the rocks are obviously a natural element, and a natural element that has existed for millennia. And so the fact that what first drew me is, why are these rocks caged, right? And so I had to then see what the artist's intention was. And it's really a way to hold a rock, but then we are reminded of, the tremendous history that a rock provides. And so, and additionally, the artist used ash, which, as we know, are leaving our forest because of the ash boring beetle or whatever it is. So there's a history here of like a permanence of a rock for millennia, and then trees that we can actually, or nature can actually take back, and it would be gone forever. And then Amy Beeler's piece, I was really interested in that because of what it's first of all, they're stunning, so I should lead with that. And then the clothesline, so she's talking about this connection of being with different family members, putting clothing out, that sort of ritual. And so I think she's done a beautiful job with this sort of wearable sort of adornment coming from something as utilitarian as a clothesline. And so for me, it's sort of the history of the pieces, the history and nostalgia with the thrift store knives and the collected found photographs. And so there's just a timelessness and a history to a lot of the pieces in this case for me.
And then you have the shoe in the middle, which that's incredibly hard to do. Aaron Peters created basically a, why am I losing my words?
Stained glass?
Stained glass shoe that's three-dimensional. Thank you so much.
Yeah, no problem.
We help each other.
Yeah.
So stained glass is historically two-dimensional. So to use that soldering and leading to create a three-dimensional sculpture is pretty wild. But it also really, you have to think about, why did this person create a mundane object, a shoe, something that would ostensibly hold a foot, but clearly not in this case. On to Jennifer Brown's piece, it's raku. Raku is an ancient technique that you will never again be able to create something that looks just like that, based on that, fiery, smoky, exciting process. It's a one and done. You get one chance to get it right, and she got it really right there. And then the addition of the steel nail from the railway. This whole box has this commonality of elevating a mundane object that I think is just lovely.
And I think the title of this piece, Holding Memory, actually sums up the whole case.
Mm-hmm. Yes, well done. Yeah. So, do we want to chat a little bit about Kate Menke's work over here?
Yeah, so I was really interested in how Kate was really speaking to women really all over the world, but particularly housewives who are in places of conflict, and being able to exchange whatever the top body would be. It's faceless, it's raceless, it's no nationality, but knowing that there's so much going on right now in the world, given Israeli and Palestinian warfare that we're seeing, and thinking about how do we kind of insert other human beings in that. We can also think about Ukraine. How might Israeli mothers and housewives be existing and mourning right now as they are dealing with grief of loved ones and lost loved ones? The same with thinking about the housewives and mothers of Palestinian families who are trying to keep their household running with no electricity or water or Wi-Fi. how do we personalize this work? And I found it very fascinating to be thinking about the crumbling of a literal home, but also what's happening with the crumbling of infrastructure, of government, of a sense of being, a culture, or whatever might be happening. How might we relate that to ourselves kind of personally? What does it look like when we insert ourselves? Maybe we're not in physical warfare, but maybe there's some other turmoil that we might be experiencing.
I would also add, like, as an African American, you know, we have mastered this idea of living through oppression, you know, and utilizing it and standing on it as a piece of a foundation that talks to a larger rising. So this is like rising out of a thing too, but also it's housed right here at the upper part of things. So it's like thinking about what's at the forefront or at the top of your consciousness or you know, just your way of being, but also this idea of you know, the term of jihad, where you would think that it's this outward battle or struggle, but really it's a very inward struggle, and that this, you know, woman is standing in an affirmative type of way, and it's very as much of it is talking, I think, in relation to the conflicts. It's also considering, you know, what is it that allows, you know, what grows up from that, you know, mm-hmm. What's the aftermath of that, you mm-hmm. know? Yeah.
That's great. So this is the corner of skirts. Mm-hmm. This is where we have Kate Menke's piece has a skirt, as does Eliana's, as does Tony's. So that's an easy way to group some things, right? Beautifully, obviously. So this is printmaking. This is a fiber. So this artist created this painting with paper pulp, which is pretty phenomenal. So it's a really active process that you have to get right immediately. So it's actually a piece of paper that this artist created with differing values of pulp. And I know we are limited on time, so we're going to try and make it through the rest of them and honor all of these artists. And we come around to this corner, and clearly we have another color story here. So we have Nick Stahl's work, where he's abstracting portraiture. We have Raymond's work that's immortalizing a really horrendous fire that took place in Zanesville and affected so many artists, himself included. Over here we have Sean Powell that's really like pushing with our concepts and asking us to imagine this new views, right? This stark overhead with a mushroom and a life safety vest and this beach blanket. It's very intriguing. I feel like it's a board game asking me to like build a story on it, right? And so let's come around here and we'll have a look at this wall over here. Again, another color story. Also, some really lovely visual abstraction and rhythm that's happening here. Are there any particular pieces that you all want to call out? So we have David La Palombara down in Athens, and he is well known for his landscape works. He's a runner, he goes through and he takes these wonderful images that feel like Ohio. Like if you're in Ohio, you've seen this if you take hikes in the woods. It's got a beautiful kind of staccato of those trees. And then you come over to Kate Menke. I should note that Kate Menke is the only artist that has two pieces, vastly different works. But this is a cyanotype of her twins that she has collaged together that gives you this a little eerie, but also endearing. Like it wants to pull you in a unique way. And then very easily you transition over to Mike Olenek's work, Crystal, where he's abstracting a cat form through a textured glass. Like you would see this in bathrooms to obscure what's happening behind, or a little bit of privacy if you have a window in your shower perhaps. So it was a really intriguing way, but also, gosh, that like ombre from blue to black is just lovely. And then you know what it is. You don't have to have all the facts. You can see it. It's nice,
Good.
right? And then we come over to Lori's piece, and it's a double exposure, which that is a lot of chance. You don't know what you're going to get. So you could have the perfect photo and you do a double exposure and it's no longer the perfect photo. Or you do a double exposure and it becomes the perfect photo. There is such a delightful ephemerality to that. It is two moments in time or multiple moments in time converging to make this new experience. So let's pop around the corner, and Jolene, you probably want to chat about this.
Yes. So I was drawn to this piece for many reasons. The formal aspects of patterns that are set up with a grid, and then her lace gloves, and then textures and things like that. So that was magical. But then the story, I wanted to know Sue Hood's Emma, and I wanted to know the chickens there. Right? So this is something maybe because I can relate to this person as a youth growing up in Appalachia, right? Where you have sort of this rocker or city vibe, and then within this sort of farm sort of scene, we assume that being that the title is Emma's Coop, that these are Emma's chickens. And so I was definitely intrigued by learning more about it, infusing some of my own feelings towards the piece. And then just the formal and textural elements to it. So happy to have it in the exhibition for sure.
Yeah. And then we come over nicely to these enormous grapes by Jason Morgan. So Jason Morgan does this hyper-realistic still life work where really raking beautiful light where it's emanating. You might think that it's a photo, but you realize very quickly that there are components to it that are not. And I think that's really interesting. Clearly, the artist has composed this. There's some sort of narrative that they're building. There's the night sky. There's the hints. We've all seen that like hint of trees where it's being lit by either light pollution from our cities, or perhaps if you're lucky, you're seeing aurora borealis, all those fun things. And then we come on over, and again, we have a color story happening where we pull over to Jennifer's work. And this feels like Carnival to me. Like it just is a celebration. It's just got so much rhythm to it. The repeat pattern, the feathering, this like duplicate face. It feels like you've caught them moving a couple of times. It's really lovely. And now that brings us over to Nora Daniel. Nora Daniel is in Zanesville, and the jurors were chatting amongst themselves, and you can chat now too, about being really happy with being rewarded as they looked longer at this piece. The longer you look, the more faces you see, the more little delicate details that the artist has they're Easter eggs all within the work. This artist really masterfully kind of controls your eye and makes you keep on moving your eye within the piece. And as you go back or come closer, you'll discover new things, which is quite nice, right? And then next to that, we have this Sip and Snippet 6, which is acrylic on, I don't know how to say that word, but it's acrylic, which it feels almost like it is a collage. So to recognize that talent and technical ability, it's a joyful piece. It's got big, speaks nicely to Jennifer's piece across the way. It's got similar kind of vibrancy. And then we come around the corner and we have, oh, did you want to say something? Don't, come on in.
No, I found it very interesting, like this kind of vibrancy that's happening here and this vibrancy that's happening with Jennifer. And then there's something about Nora's piece here that feels more solemn. It's, although the colors are bright, there's something, of course we see this, it is assuming an elder, maybe a woman, and doing some type of handwork or knitting work or something very focused, but it's not sure if we're zooming in on them. Is this like a, what am I trying to say? Like a
crystal ball.
Like a crystal ball, like we're peeking in. But then are they knitting something physically? Are they knitting something else? Because there's all these figures that are happening around here. But then when you step away, it almost feels like they're bars here, like this person is enclosed in some kind of way. And these images around here don't feel, although when you get, of course, the slow look, you're like, oh my gosh, there's so many faces. And it's like, are these spirits? This makes me feel very solemn. Like it doesn't feel like I'm not sure if they're excited to be there. Like, so there's something vibrant but also dark that's happening here and not quite sure what's happening. But it seems not quite antithetical to these other pieces because there's still this continuity of color, particularly like the reds and the pinks. But there's like this excitingness, and then it slows you down here, and then it's like you pick back up over here.
Yeah.
And I feel like this corner actually, the word that comes to mind is like the multiverse, right? Like that's always in the conversation right now, in film and animation and whatnot. But I definitely get that feeling, especially like when I look at this piece, and then I look at the elder's hands, right? And I remember always messing with my grandfather's veins, you know? And like, I'm totally getting that here, or like the creases in a blanket where you can create your own stories, or you see things happening inside clouds, you know? And I feel like this is really speaking to this, there's a creation story that's happening right here, and in this particular corner.
Everything, everywhere, all at once.
Hey, like this is the mythology corner here.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. All right, and so we come over to here and we have some really lovely continuation of that frenetic, kind of almost frenzied mark making, whether it's a digital mark or a painstakingly cut mark. These folks really continue that story really beautifully. Andrew Reach with this amazingly manipulated digital piece that's printed. It makes you feel like it's going to pop out at you. It's also really nice that the piece is cut to the shape of the image, so there's an added layer there that very nicely leads right into Don C's work, which is absolutely a collage. It's fiberworks. This artist is known for this style. He really is masterful at doing shadows and light and giving you sense of volume through collage. And in this one, he just, if you've ever been in a really old city with that Baroque style architecture, it can be really overwhelming with all of the filigree bits and pieces of the buildings. They're just shouting at you with beautiful texture. And I think he captured that beautifully here. This is a made up city, but I feel like I could just walk right into it. And then we come over here to Paul and Nicole. They both have kind of similarly palette, and it almost feels like both of them have the golden hour lighting, right? There's a quietness. It feels like it's probably winter time, like certainly here, but that's the glow that you get at that time of day when it's snowy outside, right? And we had some chats about these works, this one particularly. Did you want to call that out at all? You want to?
Oh, sure. So something very interesting that came up for me in this piece was So first, not quite sure what this is, but it made me think of a heart like the actual organ, right? And this like life coming out of it, meaning like the plants. But there's this outline of the continent of Africa. So thinking about how we know that the first human being, the oldest human being we know of, was found on the continent of Africa. But also thinking about indigenous folks and what does that mean when we have the busts of them in our homes. And what it came up for me, I'm not saying this is what the artist is saying, what came up for me is like, what is our relationship to indigeneity? What is our relationship to communities who took care of this land before many of us were here? And oftentimes we tend to really elevate cultures and the things that communities create, but don't necessarily have that same respect and care for the actual human beings who create that culture. And we have this thing in the US where we keep indigenous folks kind of in a time capsule. We always are thinking of them as people who existed hundreds and hundreds of years ago and not really thinking about indigenous people today. And so still kind of keeping them in this time capsule and in our homes as like representative of something bigger than themselves, but then calling to question, well, how are we actually thinking about their lives right now? And so I found that really interesting, especially having this in like the home space.
Yeah.
And so this also reminds me kind of of this kind of exciting, kind of slow down, exciting, and then it slows us down again, and then we get back to exciting.
Yeah, well done.
Over here with the color and the movement and the kind of wrapping, like literally, as you mentioned, like you literally wrap yourself in this kind of vibrancy.
Yeah, these pieces have sound and opportunity to hear them. And I would say, actually, back to this corner piece. This piece here, there's a corner in every city in Ohio like this.
Yeah.
If to sum up this idea of Ohio and the ethos of Ohio, it's like right here, and it's so warm inside there.
Yeah.
So I just want to say that.
Yeah.
And then this corner here, I like how each space has its own story, and I feel like this helps me this gives me that sense of what was happening during the lockdown. So you got like, the coronavirus here in the corner, and this idea of closeness and back to our histories, back to sitting at the table with one another, back to like the time to actually produce works that are just as intricate as these. There's everything in this corner is very intricate, Like this tiling is very intricate.
Yeah, this actually has a really great relationship to this, in that both of these are scraps. So these are, ceramic pieces that may have been made for this particularly, but also have been broken apart.
Yeah.
So these are called crumbs. These are many, many pieces from historical pieces that this artist has made. So there's that really beautiful conversation of material aside, they're doing very similar things. And then up to that nice kind of visual density that also speaks to crumbs in some way, also not common for folks to use the matrix as the finished piece. Rather, so most people when they do linoleum carvings, they're expecting for their finished piece to be their prints. For this artist, the finished piece is the linoleum block that has been carved and then inked. That's it. That's what you get. So, if it were to be a matrix that was used for paper prints, all of these would be backward.
Right.
So because they are not, that the artist has said, this is my finished piece, which is also really lovely. And then we come over to Michael, who has it also feels like crumbs, right? There's many, many pieces to make this sculpture. Really smart. And then this one, man, you think about the amount of time and patience to, how many bags have you ripped trying to come in the house from the grocery store? I mean, none of us do that now because we bring our bags, right? We don't use plastic bags. But before, in the before times, when we use plastic bags, they're really delicate. So this artist has layered them and figured out a way to make them a little stronger to create ostensibly a quilt. You wouldn't necessarily wrap yourself in this, but I love the idea there, right? It's beautifully done. But everyone can see, like, you're like, oh man, I know that bag. I've had that bag. I've carried one. Something really great about that. That's hard to do, to get that all to line up appropriately.
I think there's something about a story of collection of things.
Yeah.
I think this is speaking directly to consumerism, but I think there's this, what do we do with the leftovers of things? And what's our relationship with those things? Which is North Market, I believe.
It is.
So that's a place where you get things,
Right.
right?
Oh, yeah.
And so there's something very interesting about that, how this is kind of talking to each other in that way.
Wonderful. And then Beth Lindenberger with, Charged. It does automatically make you think of the coronavirus, but it also could just be atoms. They're beautifully done. The glaze lays on there. There's great crazing, which is where the glaze pulls apart from itself because the glaze doesn't exactly fit the ceramic creation, which is purposeful for sure. It's just so nice to see that beautifully done and executed. Also hard to do a wall piece for ceramics. So bravo to all of the artists. I think now is a really great time for us to close out. I want to thank you all for joining us for this overview of the 2023 Biennial Juried exhibition. Big thank you to our jurors, Dr. Melissa Crum, Yusuf, Dubois, Abdul Lateef, Jolene Powell. They had a tall task. They very much executed it beautifully. And you all should come and see this show. Big thank you to the governor, the legislature, the Ohio Arts Council's board for supporting the Ohio Arts Council, this great space, and of course, Ohio artists.